I couldn't have asked for a better first day. The Celestial Princess lived up to every glossy brochure photo I'd seen during those late nights at the office when I'd finally pulled the trigger on booking this trip. 7 days in the Caribbean, no emails, no spreadsheets, no conference calls about quarterly projections. Just me and the open ocean. The welcome cocktail party had that perfect cruise ship energy. Everyone slightly overdressed and trying too hard to have fun, but actually succeeding. I nursed a mojito that was probably too sweet while watching the social dynamics play out around the pool deck. Jenna Meyer practically bounced from group to group with her camera, that infectious enthusiasm making everyone want to pose for her travel blog. She'd introduced herself within 5 minutes of me grabbing my drink, already asking about my cruise goals and whether I minded being in some background shots. The woman could probably make friends in an empty room. Robert Montgomery held court near the bar, telling stories about his import business to a small crowd, while his wife Margaret smiled patiently beside him. The guy carried himself like someone who expected to be the center of attention wherever he went, though he genuinely perked up when I mentioned my tech consulting work. "Analytics, eh? That's the future right there," he'd said, gripping my hand with the confidence of someone who'd built his reputation on making good first impressions. Jennifer Sutton kept to herself away from the main group, sipping what looked like sparkling water while studying the horizon with real focus, like someone who actually knew what she was seeing out there. When I wandered over and mentioned spotting dolphins earlier, her face completely brightened. She dove into this amazing explanation about Caribbean marine migration that made me realize how clueless I was about the ocean we were floating on. The artist, Brooke Ellis, had taken over a corner table where she could watch everyone while drawing in a beat-up leather journal. Her purple-streaked hair caught the string lights as she worked, occasionally looking up to study someone's expression before going back to her sketch. When our eyes met, she flashed me this sly smile that suggested she was picking up on something about me I didn't even know was there. Dinner at the captain's table felt like winning some kind of lottery I hadn't entered. Captain Palmer led the conversation with stories about his 35 years at sea, his Norwegian accent giving weight to tales of storms survived and passengers safely brought to far-off ports. The man projected confidence in a way that made you feel genuinely secure about being in the middle of the ocean. The Celestial Princess represents the finest in modern maritime engineering, he'd said, gesturing toward the elegant dining room around us. 8 years under my command, and we've never had so much as a serious injury. These new ships, they practically run themselves, but there's still no substitute for experience and proper seamanship. The evening entertainment lived up to the cruise line's promises. Professional dancers, live music that actually sounded good, and a comedian who managed to be funny without being offensive. No easy feat with an audience spanning multiple generations and cultures. I found myself laughing harder than I had in months, the stress of my normal life feeling like something that belonged to a different person. Walking back to my cabin afterward, I took the long route through the ship's main corridors. The art collection really was impressive, not the generic hotel paintings I'd expected, but actual pieces with character and history. A helpful placard explained that many of the sculptures used materials from old ships, giving new life to maritime history. Something about that idea appealed to me, this sense of continuity and renewal. My balcony cabin on Deck 7 felt like a luxury I'd never experienced. The sliding door opened to show the vast Caribbean night, stars more brilliant than anything visible from my San Francisco apartment. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, dark water catching moonlight in patterns that changed with each gentle swell. I stood there for a while, letting the ocean breeze wash away the last traces of my corporate stress. No quarterly reports due, no client presentations to prep, no performance reviews to worry about. Just this moment, this perfect floating bubble of calm and possibility. The ship's gentle swaying felt like being rocked to sleep. The distant sounds of late-night parties from other decks, creating a comforting backdrop of human activity. Someone was playing guitar on a nearby balcony, the melody floating across the water and mixing with the steady rhythm of waves against the hull. I finally made myself go inside, putting my phone on the nightstand without checking for messages. This week was about unplugging, about remembering what it felt like to exist without constant digital noise. The cabin's blackout curtains would keep tomorrow's sunrise from waking me too early. The bed was ridiculously comfortable, the kind of mattress that made you wonder why you'd ever settled for less. As I got under the covers, the ship's motion felt perfectly natural, like being rocked to sleep by some gentle giant. The last thing I noticed was that calming rhythm of water against steel, the celestial princess carrying me safely through the Caribbean night toward whatever adventures tomorrow would bring. I woke up to complete silence, which felt wrong immediately. No morning announcements about breakfast buffets or poolside activities. No sounds of people moving around in the hallway outside my cabin. Just this heavy, unnatural quiet that made my chest tight. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 10:47 a.m. Way past when the ship's cheerful wake-up call should have started. I'd fallen asleep to the distant sounds of late-night parties and guitar music drifting across the water. Now, there was nothing. The hallway outside my cabin stretched empty in both directions. No housekeeping carts, no passengers heading to breakfast, no crew members doing their morning rounds. The carpet showed vacuum marks like it had been cleaned recently, but the quiet pressed against my eardrums in a way that made me want to shake my head to clear them. I tried the elevator. The call button lit up when I pressed it, but nothing happened. No mechanical sounds, no floor indicator moving. After waiting 30 seconds that felt like 5 minutes, I headed for the stairs. The main deck stopped me cold. Nobody anywhere. Half-finished tropical drinks sat melting at poolside tables, water rings marking where they'd been sitting for hours. Towels were scattered across lounge chairs like people had just gotten up to grab something and never came back. A paperback novel lay face down on the deck, pages fluttering in the ocean breeze. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. I tried again, louder. "Hello? Anyone there?" The sound bounced off the empty ship in a way that made everything feel even more wrong, like shouting into a cave that went on forever. I walked the entire pool deck, checking every corner, every bar area, every cluster of seating. Personal stuff everywhere. Sunglasses, phones, half-eaten plates of fruit. A kid's inflatable dolphin bobbed alone in the pool, the water still and undisturbed. The dining hall made my stomach drop. Tables set for breakfast service, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles, silverware shining under the chandeliers. The serving station still had food, scrambled eggs congealing under heat lamps, bacon getting cold, coffee urns that smelled fresh but sat untouched. "Hello? Staff? Anyone?" I called out, my voice echoing off the ornate ceiling. This isn't funny. But nobody was playing a joke. The silence swallowed my words and gave nothing back. I found the guest services desk on deck 5. Empty, but the computers were still logged in, screensavers bouncing around like whoever had been working just stepped away for a minute. I slipped behind the counter and started clicking through the system, my hands trembling as I navigated the unfamiliar software. The passenger manifest loaded after a few tries. 2,847 passengers, 531 crew members, all checked in, all accounted for as of yesterday's evening muster. I scrolled through pages of names, spotting some from last night. Jenna Meyer, Robert and Margaret Montgomery, Jennifer Sutton, Brooke Ellis. Everyone I'd met, everyone I'd seen at dinner and the welcome party, all supposedly still on board, all completely gone. I spent the next few hours searching deck after deck. The shopping area with its fancy stores and art galleries, empty but with lights still on, cash registers left open mid-transaction, the game room where kids should have been playing arcade games, silent machines blinking their attract modes to no one, the library with books lying open where someone had been reading, glasses still sitting on the pages. Every space told the same story. People had been there moments ago, very recently, but now they'd all just disappeared. I tried the ship's communication system in the main lobby, but the controls looked like something from a space shuttle. Buttons and switches and digital displays that meant nothing to me. I pressed a few things that seemed promising, but either nothing happened or I got error beeps that made me stop before I broke something important. The panic started as a flutter in my chest and built into something that made my hands shake and my breathing shallow. I was alone. Completely alone on a massive cruise ship somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean. No idea how to call for help. No idea what had happened to everyone else. No idea what the hell I was supposed to do next. I dropped onto one of the lobby's plush couches, surrounded by the cheerful vacation atmosphere of a ship designed to hold thousands of people. The quiet pressed down on me like a weight, broken only by the steady drone of engines that meant we were still moving, still heading somewhere I couldn't control. The Celestial Princess carried me forward through the blue Caribbean water, and I'd never felt more alone in my life. I started with the passenger cabins on Deck 6, working my way down the hallway one door at a time. Every handle turned easily. Nobody had bothered locking up before they vanished. The first few rooms looked like their occupants had just stepped out for a minute. Clothes draped over chairs, phones charging on nightstands, bathroom lights still on. Jenna Meyer's cabin hit me harder than the others. Her laptop sat open on the small desk, screen still glowing with a blog post titled, "First Night Magic on the Celestial Princess." The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. I scrolled through her enthusiastic recap of the welcome party, complete with photos of everyone I'd met. Robert raising his glass in a toast. Jennifer pointing out constellations from the deck. Brooke sketching in her corner. All of us smiling and laughing just hours ago. The post ended mid-sentence. Tomorrow, I'm planning to interview some of the crew about what it's really like working on a ship this size. I have a feeling there are some amazing stories waiting to be. That was it, like she'd been interrupted while typing. Her camera equipment covered the bed in organized chaos. Extra lenses, battery packs, memory cards labeled with dates and locations from previous trips. A half-packed suitcase showed she'd been living out of it rather than using the dresser. The bathroom counter held an impressive collection of travel-sized everything, the kind of setup that spoke to someone who'd perfected life on the road. Robert and Margaret Montgomery's suite on Deck 8 told a different story. Prescription bottles were scattered across the nightstand, one of them spilled with pills rolling across the polished wood surface. Margaret's jewelry lay spread across the dresser like she'd been deciding what to wear. Diamond earrings, a pearl necklace, a gold bracelet that caught the afternoon sunshine through the balcony door. Robert's side of the bed was messy, covers thrown back in a hurry. His reading glasses sat folded on top of a maritime history book, a bookmark placed 3/4 through. The bathroom showed signs of his morning routine. Electric razor plugged in, aftershave bottle uncapped, towel dropped on the floor. Jennifer Sutton's cabin looked like a floating research station. Marine biology textbooks stacked on every surface, waterproof notebooks filled with detailed notes, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. Her laptop displayed a spreadsheet tracking water temperature, salt levels, and something called acoustic irregularities with timestamps going back several days. One notebook lay open to yesterday's entry. Sonar readings continue to show weird patterns about 200 meters below surface. Crew dismisses as equipment malfunction, but frequency suggests organic source. Large mass, possibly whale pod, but behavior doesn't match known migration routes. Recommend further investigation. Her handwriting grew more excited toward the bottom of the page. Captain Palmer agreed to let me access ship's sonar data tomorrow. If readings are accurate, we may have discovered something significant. The crew quarters on Deck 2 told the same story. Bunks with sheets twisted like people had jumped up in a hurry. Personal photos taped to walls. Families back home. Crew members posing together at various ports. Someone had been playing cards, the hand still dealt across a small table. Coffee cups sat half empty in the break room, one still slightly warm when I touched it. The bridge felt like the most important place to check. All the navigation equipment buzzed along normally, digital displays showing our position, speed, and heading. We were still following the planned route, autopilot keeping us steady through the calm Caribbean waters. Captain Palmer's coffee mug sat beside the captain's chair, ceramic still holding a trace of heat that made my skin crawl. I found the ship's log on a computer terminal. The entries were like the most boring diary ever written. Routine position reports, weather observations, minor maintenance notes. The last entry was time-stamped 1:45 a.m. Watch change completed. All systems normal. Course steady at 180 degrees. Next position report due 0600 hours. First Officer Martinez. Nothing about emergencies. Nothing about passengers or crew going missing. Just the boring record-keeping of a ship running exactly as designed. The radio equipment looked like something from a space program. Banks of switches, frequency dials, and digital readouts that meant nothing to me. I tried pressing buttons that seemed promising, but either nothing happened, or I got warning beeps that made me stop before I broke something important. A laminated card showed emergency frequencies, but the procedures for actually using them might as well have been written in ancient Greek. The surveillance room on Deck 3 should have given me answers. Instead, it just created more questions. Dozens of monitors covered the walls, each showing a different part of the ship. Pool deck, dining halls, hallways, public areas, all empty, all exactly like I'd seen them while searching. But when I tried pulling up the recorded footage, every screen went dark after midnight. Not damaged files or tech problems, just nothing, like someone had purposely deleted 12 hours of security recordings. The system showed the cameras were working fine, capturing everything happening right now, but anything from last night had been erased. I spent 20 minutes going through menus and trying different playback settings. The footage from yesterday afternoon played perfectly. Passengers having fun on their first day, crew members doing their jobs, all the regular activity you'd expect on a cruise ship. Then midnight arrived, and everything went dark. The afternoon sun slanted through the surveillance room's small porthole, reminding me how long I'd been searching. Hours of combing through empty spaces, hunting for clues that explained nothing. My throat felt dry, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since waking up. The thought of returning to that abandoned dining hall made my stomach turn, but I needed water at least. The quiet pressed against my eardrums, just the steady buzz of engines and air conditioning, the background noise of a ship built to carry thousands of people. Without human voices and activity, those mechanical sounds felt threatening rather than comforting. I dropped into the surveillance room's desk chair, staring at the blank monitors. Everything I'd discovered pointed to the same unthinkable conclusion. Over 3,000 people had simply disappeared sometime after 1:45 a.m., leaving behind a perfectly functioning ghost ship. The rational part of my mind kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Mass evacuation for some emergency I'd slept through. Mechanical failure that required everyone to abandon ship. But where were the lifeboats? Where were the emergency announcements? Where was any sign that people had left rather than just vanished? I rubbed my eyes behind my glasses, the loneliness creeping in around me. The Celestial Princess carried me forward through the blue Caribbean water, its engines staying on course toward a destination I couldn't control, and I had never felt more alone in my life. The first sound came around 7 p.m., just as the Caribbean sun started painting the horizon orange. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps moving across the deck directly above my cabin. I froze with a forkful of cold pasta halfway to my mouth. The dining hall had felt too creepy for dinner, so I'd grabbed some leftovers from the buffet and brought them back to my room. But those footsteps sounded real, purposeful, like someone pacing back and forth on deck 8. I dropped my fork and rushed for the door. The elevator still wasn't working, so I took the stairs 2 at a time. My pulse raced as I pushed through the stairwell door onto the upper deck. Nothing. Just empty lounge chairs and the gentle Caribbean breeze moving through the rigging. I walked the entire deck, checking every corner, every dark spot. No signs that anyone had been there. Back in my cabin, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Old ships made noise. Metal expanded and contracted. Perfectly normal explanations for perfectly normal sounds. Then I heard laughter. Bright, musical laughter drifted up from somewhere below. Multiple voices, like a group of friends sharing a joke. It sounded like it was coming from the main dining hall. I grabbed my key card and headed downstairs, moving faster this time. The laughter continued as I walked, getting clearer as I got closer to the dining room. Several people for sure, having a blast. The dining hall stretched before me in complete silence. Empty tables with their perfect place settings. Dark chandeliers. Nobody anywhere. But I'd heard them. I knew I'd heard them. The elevator chimed behind me. I spun around, expecting to see the doors opening, maybe finally finding other passengers. The call buttons weren't lit. The floor indicator showed the elevator sitting still on deck 3. But that chime had been crystal clear. Piano music started up from the main lounge. Something classical, played with real skill. The melody drifted through the ship's hallways, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it hard to ignore. I followed the sound through the shopping promenade, past the dark storefronts with their security gates pulled down. The music got louder as I approached the lounge, a complex piece that required serious talent to play. The piano sat silent in the empty lounge. Its bench was pushed in, the lid closed over the keys. But the music continued for another 30 seconds before fading away, leaving me standing alone in the dark room with my heart beating fast. A splash came from the pool deck, then another. The steady sound of someone swimming laps. I ran outside, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. The pool stretched before me, its surface completely still under the deck lights. No ripples, no movement at all. But I could swear I'd heard someone swimming. That's when I found Brooks' art supplies. They were scattered across the deck near the pool bar, like someone had dropped them in a rush. Charcoal pencils, erasers, a small watercolor set. Her worn leather bag lay open, everything spilled across the textured surface. I knelt down and started collecting the supplies, my hands trembling slightly. A sketchbook had fallen face down near the pool's edge. When I picked it up, it opened to a half-finished drawing that made my stomach drop. The sketch showed passengers from the welcome party. I recognized Robert Montgomery's confident stance, Jenna's lively hand movements, Jennifer's thoughtful look. But their faces were all wrong. Distorted, eyes bulging with terror, mouths stretched in silent screams. The charcoal marks were wild, frantic, like Brooke had been trying to capture something awful happening to people she'd just met. At the bottom of the page, she'd written in unsteady handwriting, "They're not gone. They're still here." I slammed the sketchbook shut and stuffed it back in the bag. My hands shook as I collected the rest of her art supplies. The logical part of my brain kept saying there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd been working on some horror project. Maybe it was just her imagination running wild. But that drawing looked so vivid, so fresh, like she'd been sketching something right in front of her. The ship's lights came on automatically as night fell over the Caribbean. Hallway bulbs lit up one by one, making shadows that seemed to chase me down the corridor. The happy vacation vibe from earlier had vanished completely. Empty passages stretched both ways, bathed in bright white light that made everything feel sterile and unwelcoming. I made it back to my cabin and locked the door behind me. The space felt safe after hours of wandering through the empty ship. I placed Brooke's bag on the desk and tried to focus on normal things. Shower, change of clothes, maybe try to get some sleep. The voices started around 10 p.m. Muffled conversations drifted through the walls. I couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm was clearly human speech. Multiple people talking, occasional laughter, the rise and fall of ordinary conversation. I pressed my ear to the wall connecting to the neighboring cabin. The voices seemed to be coming from there, but also from the hallway, and maybe from above. Like conversations were happening all around me, just out of reach. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway appeared empty, lit by those harsh fluorescents. But the talking continued. Clearer now. I could almost make out individual words. Someone was arguing in what sounded like Spanish. A woman's voice, sharp with frustration. A man responded in the same language, his tone defensive. Their conversation faded as if they were walking away, but I never saw anyone pass by my door. More conversations started up. English this time, but with accents I couldn't place. The words were just unclear enough that I couldn't make out what they were saying, like listening to people talk through water. Around 11, I heard children crying. High, thin wails that made my chest feel tight with worry. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. Kids in trouble, calling for parents who weren't there to help. I tried turning on the TV to cover up the voices, but the ship's entertainment system was down, just static on every channel. The quiet between the static bursts made the voices in the hallway seem even more clear. At 11:30, someone called my name. Bodhi. Clear as day, coming from the hallway outside my door. A woman's voice, familiar but distorted. Bodhi, are you there? I froze on the bed, my book slipping from my grip. The voice came again, right outside my door. Bodhi, we need to talk. I crept to the peephole and looked out. Empty hallway. Nothing moving. But the voice kept going, right outside my door. Please, Bodhi, open the door. My hand hung over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at me not to open that door, but the voice sounded so real, so desperate. Who is it? I called out. Silence. Then footsteps moving away down the hallway, growing fainter until they disappeared. I stayed pressed against the door for another 10 minutes listening. The conversations continued, but no one called my name again. Just before midnight, the door handle started shaking. Not gently, violently, like someone was trying to force their way in. The metal rattled against the lock mechanism, the sound sharp and urgent in the quiet cabin. I backed away from the door, adrenaline flooding my system. The handle shook for maybe 15 seconds, then stopped abruptly. I waited, barely breathing, but it didn't start again. Through the peephole, the hallway looked exactly the same. Empty, well lit, No sign that anyone had been there. That's when I noticed how cold it had gotten. My breath came out in visible puffs, like I was standing in a freezer. The cabin's thermostat still read 72 degrees, but the air felt arctic. I grabbed a sweatshirt from my suitcase and pulled it on, but the cold seemed to go right through the fabric. The ship's movement felt different too, more rolling, like we were hitting bigger swells. But when I looked out my balcony window, the ocean appeared calm. Moonlight bounced off gentle waves that barely touched the surface. Then I saw the lights. Deep underwater, maybe 50 feet down, pale blue lights moved in patterns that didn't look natural. They pulsed and swirled, sometimes forming shapes that almost looked like structures, buildings, or maybe the outline of another ship. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to get a better view. The lights were definitely there, definitely moving with purpose. As I watched, they seemed to rise closer to the surface, their glow getting brighter. The voices in the hallway got louder, more desperate. I could hear people calling out names now, grown-ups yelling for family members. The kids' crying got worse, blending with the adult voices into a mess of panic that made my skin crawl. Maria, Maria, where are you? Has anyone seen my husband? The lifeboats. Get to the lifeboats. The voices overlapped and bounced off the walls, creating a mess of panic that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I covered my ears, but the sound got through anyway, like it was coming from inside my head. Through it all, the ship kept moving through the Caribbean night. The engines made their steady noise. The air conditioning turned on and off. All the normal sounds of a working vessel. But underneath those familiar sounds, something else moved. Something huge, stirring the water far below. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to shut out the voices. But sleep wasn't happening. The strange activity grew throughout the night, one thing after another. Sounds and feelings that made no sense at all. The celestial princess carried me forward through the dark water, and I wasn't alone anymore. I woke up to silence again, but this time it felt different. Heavier, like the quiet after a storm, when the air still holds electricity. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Salt water. Strong enough that I could taste it on my tongue, which made no sense since my cabin was sealed tight. I checked the balcony door 3 times before falling asleep. In the hallway, wet footprints marked the carpet at even spaces. Bare feet, adult-sized, leading from the elevator toward the main deck. The prints were still damp, leaving dark marks in the burgundy fibers. I knelt down and touched one. Cold water soaked through my fingertip. But it hadn't rained. The Caribbean sky outside my porthole showed nothing but blue morning light. I followed the trail upstairs, my sneakers squeaking against the wet spots. More footprints joined the first set, dozens of them, all heading the same way. Men's shoes, women's heels, children's small prints. An entire crowd had walked these halls while I slept. The dining hall stopped me cold. Every table was set for breakfast. Not the abandoned place settings from yesterday, but fresh arrangements. Clean plates, polished silverware, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles, coffee cups turned right side up, waiting to be filled. Someone had spent hours preparing for a meal that would never happen. The serving station stood empty, but the smell of bacon hung in the air. Ghost cooking for ghost guests. I moved between the tables, dragging my fingers across the spotless tablecloths. Everything looked ready for the morning rush of hungry passengers. Except there were no passengers, no staff. Just me and the proof that someone had been working all night. The library on deck 4 told a different story. Books lay scattered across reading tables, all open to specific pages. I picked up the nearest one, a maritime history text, open to a chapter titled Unexplained Vessel Disappearances. Another book showed photographs of shipwrecks, the pages marked with what looked like water stains. A third book made me tremble. Supernatural Phenomena at Sea was open to a section about ghost ships. Someone had underlined passages in blue ink. Vessels that continue sailing after their crews have perished, and spectral passengers who refuse to accept their fate. The ink looked fresh. I was shoving the book back onto its shelf when I noticed the gap. A section of the bookcase sat slightly off, like someone had moved it recently. When I pressed against it, the entire panel swung inward on hidden hinges. The passage behind it was narrow and dark, lit by emergency lighting that bathed everything in red. The air smelled like old paper and machine oil. I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. The corridor led to a room I'd never seen on any of the ship's deck plans. File cabinets lined the walls, and a single desk sat in the center under a harsh fluorescent light. A sign on the door read, "Ship's Archives, authorized personnel only." The filing system was careful and detailed, folders organized by year, each one thick with documents. I pulled the most recent file and spread its contents across the desk. Construction records for the Celestial Princess. The ship had been built in 2018 using materials from multiple sources. Most of the steel came from standard suppliers, but one entry made me stop reading. Hull reinforcement, 847 tons recycled steel, source, SS Minerva salvage operation. The Minerva. I'd never heard the name before, but something about it made my stomach twist. I dug deeper into the files. The Minerva had been a passenger liner that vanished in 1923 during a routine Caribbean cruise. No distress signal, no wreckage found. 847 passengers and crew simply disappeared in calm weather. The official investigation concluded that the ship had suffered catastrophic structural failure and sunk too quickly for anyone to escape. But witness accounts from other vessels told a different story. Ships passing through the area reported strange lights underwater and voices calling for help when no one was there. The Minerva's manifest was attached to the report. I looked through the names, searching for anything I recognized. Most were typical 1920s passengers, families on vacation, businessmen traveling for work, crew members from various countries. But the final entry made my blood run cold. Passenger manifest addendum, 847 souls lost, no survivors recovered. Vessel presumed destroyed with all hands. 847. The exact amount of steel used in the Celestial Princess. I grabbed another file folder, this one labeled Incident Reports, Celestial Princess. The documents inside painted a picture that made my hands tremble. 2019. Passenger reports. Unusual sounds during night hours. Investigation finds no mechanical issues. 2020. Several guests complain about cold spots in certain cabins. HVAC system shows normal operation. 2021. 3 passengers report seeing people in old-fashioned clothes walking the decks. Security footage shows no weird activity. 2022. Passenger Maxwell Chang files complaint about missing travelers during cruise. Medical evaluation suggests heat exhaustion and dehydration-induced hallucinations. The reports kept coming, page after page of supernatural encounters that the cruise line had written off as passenger imagination or medical issues, but the pattern was obvious. Every year, the incidents got worse. I found Maxwell Chang's personal file at the bottom of the stack. His passenger photo showed an Asian man in his 40s with kind eyes and a nervous smile. The attached documents told his story in clinical detail. Chang had booked a solo cruise in March 2021. On his 3rd day aboard, he contacted guest services claiming that other passengers had vanished overnight. Security investigated and found all passengers accounted for. Chang insisted that people he'd met were missing, but the ship's manifest showed no problems. His behavior got more and more strange. Security found him wandering through off-limits sections, saying he was looking for proof of what happened to them. The medical team had to sedate him after he tried breaking into the ship's radio room. The final report said Chang somehow got hold of a lifeboat and took off in the middle of the night. The Coast Guard found him 2 days later, badly dehydrated and beat up from being out there. He stuck to his story about the missing passengers right up until he died from complications 3 months later. But buried behind all the official paperwork, I found something else. A water-damaged notebook covered in Chang's personal handwriting. Day 3. They're all gone. Every single person I met at dinner last night. The staff insists they were never here, but I remember their faces, their stories. Something is very wrong with this ship. Day 4. Found evidence in the archives, the Minerva. This ship is built from the bones of the dead. The steel remembers. Day 5. The voices are getting louder. They want me to join them. I can see them now, walking the decks in clothes from another era. They're trying to tell me something. The last entry was from the night he got away. I understand now. The cycle repeats. Every few years, the ship claims new passengers to feed the old ones. I have to get off before... The sentence ended mid-word, the pen trailing off the page. I sat back in the archive room's chair, my thoughts spinning. Chang's experience matched mine exactly. The empty ship, the supernatural encounters, the evidence that something awful had happened to the other passengers. But according to the official records, Chang had been delusional. The other passengers had never disappeared. They'd finished their cruise and gone home safely. So why did I remember meeting Jenna Meyer? Why could I picture Robert Montgomery's confident handshake and Jennifer Sutton's passionate explanation of marine biology? The lights in the archive room started blinking. Once, then again, settling into a steady strobe that made the shadows move across the walls. Bodhi. My name bounced through the ship's ventilation system, carried by air currents that shouldn't exist. The voice was female, familiar. Jenna's excited tone, but warped like it was traveling through water. Bodhi, where are you? More voices joined in, Robert's commanding voice calling from somewhere above, Jennifer's steady words drifting up from the lower decks, children crying in languages I couldn't place. The archive room's temperature plummeted 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in visible puffs as frost began forming on the metal filing cabinets. We've been looking for you, Jenna's voice said, closer now, coming through the air vents directly above my head. Why didn't you come to breakfast? I grabbed Chang's notebook and the Minerva files, stuffing them into my jacket. The voices grew louder, more demanding. Footsteps pounded through the hidden corridor behind me. Bodhi, don't run from us, Robert's voice commanded. We need to talk. The emergency lighting in the corridor began flashing in sequence, creating a strobe effect that made it hard to see. I stumbled toward the library, breathing hard. Behind me, the voices multiplied, dozens of people calling my name, their words overlapping into a chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. The hidden panel slammed shut just as I reached the library. I spun around, pressing my back against the bookshelf, but the voices continued. They were in the walls now, traveling through the ship's infrastructure like the building itself had become a speaker system. You can't hide forever, Jennifer's voice said, calm and reasonable. We just want to help you understand. The library lights started blinking in that same rhythm I'd seen in the archive hallway. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. Everything kept switching between bright white and total black. I bolted toward the main deck, gripping Chang's notebook tight. Those voices chased me down every hallway, getting louder and more insistent as I ran. Whatever got the passengers on the Celestial Princess, whatever took Maxwell Chang 3 years back, now it wanted me. And this time, I was beginning to realize that the official records were complete lies. The other passengers hadn't made it home safely. They'd never gotten off the ship at all. The first ghost appeared while I was reading Chang's notebook in the main lounge. Jenna Meyer stood by the railing, her back to me, camera hanging around her neck just like I remembered. The coral sundress moved in a breeze I couldn't feel. Relief washed over me so fast I almost cried. "Jenna," I called out, jogging toward her. "Thank God, I thought I was going crazy. Where is everyone? What happened to—" She turned around. Her face was gray and swollen, skin sagging like wet cloth. Seawater dripped from her hair, collecting on the deck around her feet. Her eyes were milky white, looking right through me like I didn't exist. I stumbled backward, my sneakers sliding on the water she'd left behind. When I blinked, she was gone. Just empty railing and the sound of my own rough breathing. My hands shook as I held Chang's notebook tighter. Heat stroke, dehydration. That had to be it. The human brain could create incredibly detailed hallucinations when pushed to its limits, but the puddle of seawater was still there. I knelt down and touched it. Ice cold, salt water, just like the smell that had been following me around the ship. The liquid was real, even if Jenna wasn't. The dining hall pulled me back again. Something about those perfectly arranged tables nagged at me, like I was overlooking something crucial. I shoved through the double doors and froze. Robert Montgomery sat at the captain's table, exactly where he'd been 2 nights ago. Same navy blazer, same confident posture. He was cutting into a steak that wasn't there, raising an empty fork to his mouth with practiced elegance. "Robert." My voice came out as a whisper. He looked up and smiled. The same charming expression I remembered, except his skin had turned gray and waterlogged like Jenna's. His expensive clothes hung on him like they were soaked through, and when he opened his mouth to speak, seawater poured out instead of words. I backed toward the exit, but movement caught my eye and made me freeze. More figures were appearing throughout the dining hall. Passengers in modern cruise wear sat next to people in 1920s formal attire. The recent dead mixing with the long dead, all of them dripping with seawater, all of them staring at me with those cloudy white eyes. A woman in a beaded flapper dress sat next to a man in cargo shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. Children in old-fashioned sailor suits played silent games with kids wearing Disney t-shirts. The tables filled with ghostly diners from different eras, all united by the same gray, drowned look. The temperature dropped fast. My breath came out in white puffs as frost started forming on the chandeliers above. The ghosts kept eating their phantom meal, cutting invisible food and raising empty glasses in toasts I couldn't hear. I ran. The hallways felt different now, stretched out. The cheerful vacation decorations looked creepy under the blinking lights. Wet footprints showed up in the carpet ahead of me, as if invisible people were walking just out of sight. On deck 5, I nearly crashed into Captain Palmer. He stood at attention in the middle of the hallway, his white uniform ripped and covered with what looked like oil. Seaweed draped from his shoulders like military decorations. His face was a mess of gray flesh and visible bone, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like waves crashing against rocks. "This is my ship." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to edge around him. He turned to follow my movement, water dripping from his torn uniform onto the carpet. "The course is set," he continued, his words echoing strangely in the narrow corridor. We sail where we've always sailed, where we'll always sail. Behind him, the hallway stretched endlessly into darkness. Cabin doors swung open and shut by themselves, showing brief glimpses of ghostly passengers trapped in their eternal routines. A woman in a 1920s evening gown brushed her hair in front of a mirror that reflected only black emptiness. A modern family unpacked suitcases filled with nothing but seawater. I pushed past Palmer and bolted for the stairs. His laughter chased after me, a sound like someone drowning. The pool deck gave me no way out. Brooke Ellis knelt beside the water, her purple-streaked hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She was drawing frantically in the air with charcoal that wasn't there, her movements desperate and frantic. As I watched, her invisible artwork became visible on the deck around her. Bloody handprints appeared on the concrete. Words formed in dripping red letters. "Don't let them take you," and "The water remembers," and "Run." She looked up at me, her young face twisted with terror. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I could read her lips. "Get to the lifeboats." More ghosts appeared around the pool, passengers from both eras, all of them reaching toward me with outstretched hands. Their fingers passed through my clothes but left trails of freezing cold that made me gasp. I could see how they died now. The visions played out like overlapping movies, past and present, bleeding together in a horrific montage. The Minerva's passengers screamed as massive waves crashed over their ship. The vessel tilted at crazy angles while something vast and dark rose from the depths below. Tentacles of pure shadow wrapped around the hull, pulling the ship down into water that glowed with unnatural light. But mixed with those century-old deaths, I saw recent horrors. Jenna Meyer being dragged from her cabin by hands made of darkness, her camera flashing uselessly as she tried to document her own disappearance. Robert Montgomery pulled through the floor of the dining hall, his confident expression finally cracking into terror. Jennifer Sutton yanked from the bridge where she'd been studying sonar readings, her scientific mind unable to process what was happening to her. Each death fed something hungry in the deep water. Each soul became part of the ship's endless crew, trapped to sail the same route forever. The ghosts pressed closer, their touch getting stronger with each passing moment. What had started as cold sensations became actual physical contact. Fingers grabbed at my jacket, my hair, my skin. They were becoming real. Jennifer Sutton appeared directly in front of me, her marine biologist's calm replaced by desperate urgency. Unlike the others, she seemed more aware, more present. Her lips moved carefully, forming words I could almost hear. "The steel remembers," she whispered, her voice like wind through water. "The Minerva's bones hold all of us, but you can still escape." She pointed toward the lifeboat stations with a hand that shifted between solid and translucent. "Before midnight, before the cycle completes." "What cycle?" I managed to ask, but she was already fading, her shape dissolving like mist. The other ghosts pressed closer, their grasping hands becoming more demanding. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and ice began forming on the pool's surface, even in the tropical air. I ran for the lifeboat stations, the ghostly voices rising behind me in a chorus of the drowned. They were hunting me now, no longer content to simply appear and disappear. The supernatural energy was building towards something, and I was running out of time to figure out what. The ship's lights began failing in sequence, creating moving patches of complete darkness that seemed to swallow everything they touched. In those black spaces, I could hear the sound of rushing water and the screams of passengers from both ships, past and present, all crying out in the moment of their deaths. Whatever was coming, it would happen soon. And I was starting to understand that the official records were more than just wrong. They were lies designed to hide the truth about what really happened to ships built from the Minerva's steel. The Emergency Coordination Center's steel door slammed shut behind me with a satisfying clang. My hand shook as I turned the manual lock, the heavy mechanism clicking into place just as something crashed against the other side. The pounding started immediately. Not fists, something harder, like bones against metal. But the door held, and for the first time in hours, the temperature felt normal. 72 degrees according to the digital readout on the wall. I pressed my back against the door and tried to catch my breath. The coordination center was small but packed with equipment I'd never seen before. Banks of monitors showed ship schematics, weather data, and emergency protocols. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in a crimson glow, but it was steady. No flickering, no supernatural interference. The pounding stopped. Silence pressed against my eardrums like diving too deep. I walked to the main console, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The system was already logged in, probably left that way by whoever had been on duty when everything went wrong. A placard next to the keyboard read, "Emergency Operations Manual. Authorized personnel only." Well, I was authorizing myself. The ship's technical specs filled the first screen. Weight, engine power, how many passengers it could hold, all the numbers that made the Celestial Princess a floating city. But buried in the construction details, I found what I was looking for. Hull composition: 89% standard maritime steel, 11% recycled materials from decommissioned vessels. I clicked deeper into the recycled materials list. Most of it was routine: old cargo ships, retired naval vessels, scrapped pleasure craft. But there it was, highlighted in a separate section. Primary structural steel, 847 tons. Source: SS Minerva Salvage Operation, 1924. 847 tons, the exact weight of the Minerva's hull when she'd been built in 1922. They hadn't just used some of her steel, they'd used all of it. The entire skeleton of the doomed ship had been melted down and reformed into the Celestial Princess. No wonder the spirits were so powerful here. This wasn't just a ship built with recycled materials. It was the Minerva, reborn. I brought up the emergency protocols next. Page after page of procedures for every possible disaster: fire, collision, medical emergency, terrorist attack. And there, buried in Section 12, lifeboat deployment, manual override. The instructions were detailed but straightforward. Even someone with no maritime training could follow them, assuming they could reach the lifeboat stations. The system needed 2 keys turned at the same time, followed by a specific sequence of button presses. The whole process would take maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes I'd have to survive while the ghosts tried to stop me. The navigation system showed our current position: 18 degrees, 42 minutes north, 65 degrees, 17 minutes west. I cross-referenced it with the shipping lane charts displayed on another monitor. The nearest commercial route was 200 nautical miles northeast. A long way to drift in a lifeboat, but not impossible if the emergency beacon worked. Something scraped against the door. Long, deliberate scratches like fingernails on metal. The noise made my teeth ache. "Bodhi," Jenna's voice drifted through the ventilation system. "Why are you hiding from us?" I ignored her and kept working. The ship's current status showed on the main display. All systems green except for one flashing yellow indicator. Supernatural activity detected, level 4. The ship's own computers recognized what was happening. How many other vessels had this same warning system? How many crews had seen this alert and dismissed it as a software glitch? "We just want to help you understand." Robert's voice joined Jenna's, coming from the air vents above my head. "You don't have to be afraid." The temperature gauge on the wall started dropping. 70 degrees, 68, 65. My breath began coming out in small puffs. I pulled up the lifeboat inventory. 12 boats total, each rated for 50 passengers. The closest station was on deck 7, port side. I could reach it through the main corridor if I moved fast enough. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Whatever protected this room was getting weaker. "The water is so peaceful down here," Jennifer's voice whispered through the speakers. "No more research deadlines. No more grant applications. Just the eternal rhythm of the waves." 60 degrees now. Ice crystals started forming on the monitors. I memorized the lifeboat procedures and grabbed the emergency keys from their locked cabinet. The glass broke easily under my elbow, and I stuffed both keys in my pocket, along with a handheld GPS unit and emergency flare gun. The scratching at the door got worse. Multiple sets of fingernails now, creating a chorus of scraping metal that made my skin crawl. "You can't stay in there forever," Captain Palmer's voice boomed through the room. "This is my ship, and I decide who stays and who goes." 58 degrees. The monitors started going dark one after another as moisture clouded their screens. Whatever supernatural energy was building, it was overpowering even the protected systems. I glanced at my watch. 11:17 p.m. Less than an hour until midnight. Jennifer's warning rang in my memory. Before midnight, before the cycle completes. The emergency radio came to life on its own. Static filled the room, then voices started coming through the white noise. Passengers calling for help, crew members reporting bizarre situations, conversations from different time periods mixing together in a chaos of the doomed. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the SS Minerva. We are taking on water at an impossible rate. Something has breached our hull from below. Request immediate assistance. Coast Guard, this is the Celestial Princess. We have a supernatural emergency. Passengers are disappearing. The ship is not responding to navigation commands. Anyone receiving this transmission, stay away from coordinates 18°42'N, 65°17'W. The water here is cursed. The dead do not rest." I clicked off the radio, but the voices kept going. They were coming from inside the walls now, moving through the ship's systems like the building itself was talking. 55 degrees. The emergency lights started to blink on and off. Time to go. I unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor. The cold hit me hard. The hallway was freezing, maybe 30 degrees, and my breath came out in thick, white clouds. Wet footprints covered the carpet in overlapping patterns. Dozens of people had walked this corridor recently, all heading toward the lifeboat stations. But these weren't rescue attempts. They were hunting parties. The lights went out in sequence as I moved, creating a wave of darkness that followed me down the hall. Behind me, I could hear the coordination center door slamming open and shut repeatedly, like something was frustrated that I'd escaped. Shadowy shapes appeared at the edges of my sight. Passengers in modern cruise clothes walked next to people dressed in 1920s formal wear. They moved with clear intent now, no longer happy to just show up and vanish. Their see-through bodies were getting more solid every minute. A woman in a beaded flapper dress stepped right in front of me. Her face was destroyed gray flesh and bare bone, but her eyes burned with evil intelligence. "You don't understand what you're doing," she said, her voice like waves against rocks. "If you leave, who will remember us? Who will tell our stories?" I pushed through her, feeling an ice-cold chill spread across my chest where we touched. She laughed as I passed, a sound like drowning. More ghosts appeared ahead of me. A family in modern vacation clothes, their faces twisted with the same gray, waterlogged look. Children in sailor suits from the 1920s, their small hands reaching toward me with desperate hunger. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead. Doors opened and closed on their own, revealing glimpses of ghostly passengers going about their eternal routines. But now they were all watching me, their clouded white eyes following my every step. "Join us," they whispered in unison. "Stay with us. Sail with us forever." The lifeboat station was just ahead. I could see the orange emergency equipment through the reinforced glass doors. But between me and escape stood every ghost on both ships, their bodies now solid enough to block my path. They pressed closer, their touch burning with supernatural cold. Each contact drained something from me: warmth, energy, hope. I understood now how the other passengers had died. Not violently, but slowly, their life force fed to the hungry spirits until nothing remained but empty shells. My watch read 11:43 p.m., 17 minutes until midnight, until the cycle finished and I became another ghost walking these halls forever. The spirits grinned with broken faces, feeling my growing weakness. They had time on their side. All the time in the world. But I still had the flare gun. I fired the flare gun straight into the nearest ghost's chest. The red phosphorus burst exploded through the spirit of a man in a 1920s dinner jacket, and he screamed, actually screamed, as his body dissolved like smoke. The other ghosts pulled back, their solid hands suddenly becoming see-through again. I didn't wait to see how long it would last. I ran through the opening they'd left, emergency keys rattling in my pocket as more flares rolled across the deck behind me. The corridor tilted at a crazy angle, as if the ship was rolling in massive swells. But when I glanced through a porthole, the ocean looked perfectly calm. Something had grabbed the celestial princess from underneath, twisting her hull in ways that made no sense. Chairs floated past my head. A potted plant drifted by at eye level, its soil spilling out in slow motion. The ship's gravity had gone completely nuts, but I kept running along what used to be the floor, now angled steep as a ramp. "Bodhi!" Jenna's voice shrieked from behind me. "You can't leave us here!" I reached Lifeboat Station 3 and crashed into the heavy glass doors. Through the windows, I could see the bright orange emergency gear waiting inside. But the manual release was on the other side, and ghostly crew members in soaked uniforms stood guard around the controls. My watch showed 11:51 p.m. 9 minutes. I smashed the glass with my elbow and climbed through, feeling shards slice through my jacket. The crew ghosts turned toward me with rage written across their faces. Their captain's bars and officer stripes were still visible on their torn uniforms. "No one leaves this ship," the chief officer said, his voice like grinding metal. "Captain's orders." The temperature dropped to maybe 20 degrees. My breath came out in thick white clouds as I fumbled for the emergency keys. The ghosts moved to surround me, but they were cautious now. The flare gun had hurt them somehow. I found the first keyhole and turned it. A mechanical click carried through the station. The ghostly officers lunged forward, but I fired another flare into the ceiling. Red light exploded overhead, and they scattered like roaches. Second key, turn, another click. The lifeboat deployment sequence kicked on with grinding gears and cables. Through the station windows, I watched the orange boat slowly swing out over the black water 50 feet below. The ship rolled further. Now I was standing on what used to be the wall, and the lifeboat hung at a weird angle, but the mechanical system still worked. Whatever supernatural force was twisting the celestial princess hadn't messed with the emergency equipment. I climbed into the boat just as every ghost on the ship appeared around the station. Hundreds of them. Passengers from both eras, crew members, children, all pressing against the windows with their destroyed faces. Their mouths moved together, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Stay with us. Sail with us forever." Icy fingers clawed at my jacket as the boat began its descent. Dead hands tried to drag me back toward the ship, but I kicked hard and slammed the final release button. The lifeboat plummeted toward the dark water below. Above me, the celestial princess had become something horrific. Her lights blinked in nauseating patterns, and her hull curved into sickening coils. Dead passengers crowded every deck, stretching down toward my small boat with starving desperation. Just before I hit the water, Jennifer Sutton appeared beside me in the boat. Not the gray, waterlogged version I'd been seeing. This was Jennifer as she'd been in life. Smart, calm, focused. Her marine biologist jacket was dry, and her eyes were clear and sharp. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice cutting through the supernatural chaos above. "I can only maintain this form for a few seconds." She grabbed my hand, and suddenly I could see it. A vision playing out like a movie in my head. A cargo ship cutting across the horizon at dawn. The Prosperity, registry number clearly visible on her hull. She'd passed through these coordinates in 18 hours, heading northeast toward Puerto Rico. "Follow the North Star until sunrise," Jennifer said, her form already starting to fade. "Then use the sun. Stay in the shipping lane. Captain Kelly will find you." "Jennifer, what really happened to—" But she was gone. The lifeboat hit the water with a splash that bounced like thunder. I looked up one last time at the Celestial Princess. Every light on the ship went dark at once, leaving only a black outline against the stars. But her windows glowed with pale, sickly light that seemed to pulse steadily. The ghostly voices grew quieter as I drifted away from the hull. The supernatural cold faded, replaced by normal Caribbean warmth. The ship's twisted angles straightened out until she looked like a regular cruise liner again. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd survived. The Celestial Princess kept moving on her set course, carrying her cargo of the dead toward whatever destination they'd been sailing to for a century. The waves hit against my tiny lifeboat as I turned on the emergency beacon and looked over my supplies. Water for 3 days, emergency rations for maybe 4, a radio that might work if I could reach the right frequency, and Jennifer's promise that help would come. I looked up at the North Star and started rowing. I drifted through the void, watching the emergency beacon's red light flash against the stars. The radio hissed with static as I twisted the dial, hunting for any frequency that might link me to the living world. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Bodhi Chan. I'm in a lifeboat at approximately 18 degrees, 42 minutes north, 65 degrees, 17 minutes west. Please respond." Nothing but static crackled back. I went through my supplies again. 3 water bottles, roughly a gallon between them. Emergency rations that looked like cardboard wrapped in foil. The survival manual was waterproof, but written for people who actually knew what they were doing. I opened to the navigation section, studying star charts by the beacon's red glow. Find the North Star. Follow it until sunrise. Jennifer's voice replayed in my memory, clear as if she was sitting beside me. The water around my tiny boat was pitch black, like floating in space. No moon tonight, just the stars and that blinking red light that hopefully meant someone, somewhere, was tracking my position. The waves were gentle, almost peaceful after the supernatural chaos of the ship. But something was wrong with the water. Deep below the surface, maybe 100 feet down, pale lights moved in slow patterns. Not the random flash of glowing fish. These lights had purpose. They pulsed in sequence, forming shapes that looked almost like structures, like the outline of a ship's hull sliding through the depths. I gripped the sides of the lifeboat and forced myself to look away. Heat stroke. Dehydration. My brain was already starting to play tricks on me. The radio hissed with a burst of static, then cleared for a moment. A voice came through, distant and distorted. "Anyone receiving this transmission, stay away from coordinates." The signal faded back to white noise before I could make out the rest. I tried adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone. By dawn, my mouth felt like I'd been chewing sand. I'd rationed myself to small sips of water through the night, but the Caribbean sun was going to be brutal. The survival manual recommended staying covered during daylight hours, so I rigged up a makeshift shelter using the emergency tarp. The sun climbed higher, turning my little orange boat into an oven. I checked my position against the star charts and compass, trying to follow Jennifer's directions toward the shipping lanes. Northeast. Stay in the shipping lanes. But the water kept drawing my attention. When I looked down at my reflection, something was wrong with my face. The features were mine, but the skin looked gray and waterlogged. My eyes appeared clouded, like the ghosts on the ship. I blinked hard and looked again. Normal reflection, just the heat getting to me. The radio crackled again around noon. This time I caught fragments of conversation. Coast Guard Station Miami. We have a possible survivor. Negative on radar contact. No vessels reported missing. Check the psychiatric evaluation protocols. I grabbed the handset. Hello? Hello, this is Bodhi Chen. I'm in a lifeboat. Can anyone hear me? Static ate up my words. The voices kept talking like I hadn't said anything. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe I was just hearing things. The second night was rougher. I'd polished off one water bottle and cracked open the second, but my lips were already splitting. The emergency rations tasted like salted cardboard, and my stomach twisted from the weird food. The lights under the water were brighter now, closer. They rose toward the surface in spiraling patterns that made my eyes water to follow. Sometimes they looked like the outline of a massive ship. Sometimes they looked like reaching hands. I tried the radio again, cycling through every frequency. Most channels gave me nothing but static, but on one I picked up what sounded like a conversation between ship officers. Unusual sonar readings approximately 200 meters below surface. Frequency suggests organic source, but behavior inconsistent with known migration routes. Captain Palmer's agreed to provide access to the ship's sonar data. Jennifer's voice. I was hearing Jennifer's voice on the radio, talking about her research. But that couldn't be right. Jennifer was dead. I'd seen her ghost, talked to her spirit. Unless I was dead too. The thought hit me like ice water. What if the lifeboat escape had been another dream? What if I died on the ship with everyone else? And this was just my mind's way of dealing with death? The gray face in the water, the voices on the radio, the lights below. Maybe I was already one of them. I pinched my arm hard enough to leave marks. The pain felt real. The thirst felt real. The sun burning my skin felt real. But so had everything on the Celestial Princess. Day 3 nearly broke me. I'd finished the second water bottle and started rationing the third into tiny sips that barely wet my tongue. My skin was lobster red despite the tarp, and every movement sent spikes of pain through my dried-out muscles. The hallucinations were getting worse. I kept seeing other lifeboats in the distance, orange dots on the horizon that disappeared when I tried to focus on them, rescue helicopters that turned out to be seabirds, ships that were just clouds. But around noon, something different showed up on the horizon. A dark speck that didn't vanish when I blinked. It grew bigger as I watched, taking the unmistakable shape of a cargo vessel. I grabbed for the flare gun with trembling hands, nearly dropping it overboard. The ship was maybe 2 miles away, close enough to spot my signal if I timed it right. I aimed the flare high and pulled the trigger. Red smoke bloomed against the blue sky. The cargo ship's course changed slightly, turning toward my position. 20 minutes later, the Prosperity pulled alongside my lifeboat. Rough hands hauled me up the ladder, while my legs gave out completely. Someone wrapped me in blankets while another crew member started an IV line in my arm. "Easy there, son," a gravelly voice said. "You're safe now." I looked up into the weathered face of Captain Jerry Kelly. His green eyes were kind but sharp, studying my condition with the quick assessment of someone who'd seen plenty of trouble before. "The ship," I croaked through cracked lips. "The Celestial Princess. Did you see it?" Captain Kelly looked unhappy and turned to his first officer. "What ship? We've got nothing on radar except you." "It was right there." I pointed back toward where I'd come from, but the horizon showed only empty water. "A cruise ship. 3,000 passengers. They're all dead. Son, you've been through hell out there. Heat stroke can make you see all kinds of things." Kelly held up a waterproof pouch they'd found in my lifeboat. "These your documents?" I nodded, but when he opened the pouch, the papers inside were completely blank. My boarding pass, my cabin key card, my dinner reservation. All of it was just empty white paper. "The dehydration's got you confused," Kelly said gently. "There's no record of any missing cruise ship. Coast Guard would have issued alerts." But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd survived. The blank papers just proved how completely the supernatural forces had wiped away any trace of the Celestial Princess, just like they'd done with the Minerva a century ago. As the Prosperity carried me toward Puerto Rico, I watched the empty ocean stretch behind us. Somewhere out there, the ghost ship continued its endless journey, carrying its cargo of the dead toward whatever destination they'd been searching for 100 years. And I was the only one who could remember they'd ever existed at all. The Maritime Hospital in San Juan reeked of bleach and old coffee. I'd been stuck there for 3 days, connected to IV bags that slowly put fluids back into my body, while doctors ran tests and asked the same questions again and again. "Tell me again about this cruise ship," Dr. Martinez said, flipping through my chart. She was maybe 40, with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen plenty of delusional patients pulled from the ocean. "The Celestial Princess? 8 decks. Capacity for 3,000 passengers. I had a balcony cabin on deck 7. The details came out automatically now, like reciting a script. The captain was Gregory Palmer, Norwegian accent, 35 years at sea. Dr. Martinez scribbled notes without raising her head. "And you said you booked this cruise through which company?" "Caribbean Dream Lines. I paid with my credit card in March." She nodded and closed the chart. "Mr. Chen, I've spoken with the Coast Guard and maritime authorities. There's no record of a ship called the Celestial Princess. Caribbean Dream Lines went out of business in 2018. The words stunned me, but I kept my voice steady. "Check my credit card statements. The charge will be there." "We did check. Your bank shows no transactions with any cruise line in the past year." Her expression softened slightly. "Severe dehydration can cause extremely vivid hallucinations. The mind creates elaborate scenarios to explain traumatic experiences." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains. 43. I'd memorized every mark during the past 3 days of having this same conversation with doctors, Coast Guard officers, and a psychiatrist who kept asking about my stress levels at work. What about the other passengers? Jenna Meyer, Robert Montgomery, Jennifer Sutton. They have to exist somewhere. We ran those names through every database we have access to. No matches for people who would have been on a Caribbean cruise last week. Dr. Martinez sat down in the plastic chair beside my bed. "I know this is difficult to accept, but sometimes our minds... I know what I saw." She stayed quiet for a moment, then pulled out a tablet and showed me a satellite image. "This is the area where Captain Kelly found you. Maritime traffic control shows no vessels in that region for the past 2 weeks except the Prosperity. The image showed empty blue water. No ship, no debris. Nothing to indicate that 3,000 people had vanished into the Caribbean night. After Dr. Martinez left, I lay in the narrow hospital bed and tried to make sense of what couldn't be real. My boarding pass was blank paper. My cabin key card was just a piece of plastic with no magnetic strip. Even my clothes had been wrong. Instead of the polo shirt and khakis I remembered wearing, they'd found me in a hospital gown that looked like it had been underwater for decades. But I knew what had happened. The details were too specific, too consistent to be hallucinations. Brooks' art supplies felt real in my hands. That overly sweet mojito at the welcome party, I could still taste it. Jennifer's voice explaining marine migration patterns still rang in my ears. On my 4th day, a Coast Guard investigator named Lieutenant Torres came by with a thick folder. He was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with the kind of crisp uniform that suggested he took his job seriously. "I've been looking into your case," he said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Officially, we're treating this as a case of accidental man overboard from an unknown vessel, but I found some things that might interest you." He opened the folder and spread out photocopied documents across my bed table. Newspaper clippings, Coast Guard reports, maritime incident files. Every 10 to 15 years, someone gets pulled from the ocean in this general area with a similar story. Always alone, always claiming their fellow passengers disappeared overnight. He pointed to a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1987. This guy said he escaped from a luxury yacht where everyone else vanished. Before that, 1973, a woman rescued from a lifeboat claimed she'd been on a cruise ship that no one could find any record of. I grabbed the 1973 report. The woman's story sent chills down my spine. Passengers vanishing after midnight, strange encounters, getting away in a lifeboat. They'd found her with empty paperwork and clothes that weren't what she remembered putting on. What happened to them? Most were institutionalized. A few disappeared entirely, checked themselves out of hospitals and were never seen again. Torres pulled out another document. But this one's interesting. Maxwell Chang, 2021. Ring any bells? My blood went cold. Chang's Coast Guard file showed a photo of the man whose notebook I'd found in the ship's archives. Narrow face, wire-rimmed glasses, the same focused expression I remembered from his research notes. He claimed passengers on his cruise had vanished. Torres continued. Described supernatural encounters, ghost ships, the whole thing. Coast Guard found him in a lifeboat about 50 miles from where we found you. What happened to him? Died 3 months later. Complications from exposure, officially. But the attending physician noted that Chang kept insisting he needed to warn people about something called the Minerva cycle. I put down the file, my hands trembling. Chang had cracked it. He'd seen the pattern, how all those ships were connected through the Minerva's steel, and they'd killed him for trying to tell someone. "There's more," Torres said quietly. "I did some digging into maritime records from the 1920s. Found reports of survivors from something called the SS Minerva incident. Same story. Passengers claiming their fellow travelers had disappeared, leaving them alone with supernatural entities. He showed me a faded report from 1923. A woman named Catherine Mills, rescued from a lifeboat, claiming that everyone else on the Minerva had disappeared overnight. Her account described ghostly figures, freezing cold, and voices calling from empty corridors. The official report says the Minerva sank in a storm with all hands lost, Torres said. But Catherine Mills insisted she'd escaped in a lifeboat after the other passengers were taken by something supernatural. She spent the rest of her life in an asylum. I thought about Jennifer's warning. The cycle completes at midnight. The steel remembers, the Minerva's bones holding all of them. "How many ships?" I asked. built with steel from the Minerva salvage? I found records for at least 6 vessels over the past century. Most had unusual incident reports, unexplained disappearances, equipment malfunctions, crew members reporting supernatural encounters. Torres gathered up the documents. The Celestial Princess would have been the newest. After he left, I stared out the hospital window at San Juan Harbor. Cargo ships and fishing boats moved through the blue water under normal Caribbean sunshine. Everything looked peaceful and rational, like the supernatural world I'd experienced was just a fever dream. But when I reached into the pocket of the clothes they'd given me, my fingers found something that shouldn't exist. Jennifer Sutton's business card. The paper was water-damaged and faded, but her name was still clear. Dr. Jennifer Sutton, marine biologist, Cambridge University. Below that, an address in London and a phone number. I called the number from the hospital phone. A recorded message told me the number was no longer in service. I asked a nurse to help me look up the address online. The Cambridge University directory had no record of Dr. Jennifer Sutton. The London address led to an empty lot where a building had been torn down in 2019. But the card was real. I could feel the raised lettering under my fingertips, smell the faint ocean scent that stuck to the paper. Physical proof that Jennifer had existed, even if every official record said otherwise. Dr. Martinez let me go on day 6 with a prescription for anxiety medication and a referral to a psychiatrist in San Francisco. The Coast Guard closed my case as accidental man overboard with delusional episode caused by severe dehydration. I flew home to my apartment in the Mission District, where everything was exactly as I'd left it. My laptop still showed the browser tabs I'd been using to research cruise deals. My suitcase sat packed in the bedroom, ready for a vacation that had officially never happened. But my credit card statement showed no charge from Caribbean Dreamlines. My email had no confirmation for a cruise booking. According to every piece of evidence, I'd never left San Francisco. I spent the next week trying to get back to normal life. My boss was understanding about my medical emergency, and my co-workers figured I'd had some kind of breakdown from work stress. Everyone was careful not to ask too many questions, but I couldn't let it go. I started digging into maritime incidents, searching for patterns that might show when the cycle would happen again. The survivors Torres had shown me were pulled from the water at roughly 15-year gaps, always from the same patch of Caribbean Sea. If this timeline stayed consistent, the next incident wouldn't occur until the late 2030s, unless something shifted, unless those things got stronger or more desperate for victims. I made a file on my laptop, recording everything I could recall about the Celestial Princess. Every passenger I'd talked to, every detail of the ship's rooms and hallways, every second of those encounters with whatever lived there. I typed it all out, knowing most people would think it was just some crazy story I'd made up. But maybe someone would believe. Maybe someone would spot the warning signs when the cycle started over. I kept Jennifer's business card in my wallet, pulling it out every few days to make sure it hadn't vanished like everything else. The water damage got worse as time went on, the ink running and the paper turning brittle, but it stayed real. Solid proof that I hadn't made it all up. That somewhere in the Caribbean, the Celestial Princess kept sailing her endless route, carrying her cargo of the dead toward whatever place they'd been trying to reach for 100 years. And I was the only one left to remember their names.